Okay. Hey, how you doing?
I'm okay. It's never a podcast recording without some technical weirdness going
I
on.
Technology is very frustrating. I've learned this over the past week or so, but I'll tell you about that later.
It's so frustrating. Today, we're going to do something different. We are going to talk about the Netflix TV show Sex Education, which just wrapped up all of its seasons. So it just finished season 4, and there will be no more seasons. And this is a show that Eric and I have watched pretty regularly in bursts, as one does, like in terms of binge watching those Netflix shows. But anyway, Eric, why don't you talk about why you thought it might? So you had said to me in a text that you didn't need to do sex education for our podcast, but you said that you would really just wanted me to watch it. So do you want to talk about that a little bit? So you were genuinely interested in doing this for a podcast episode, or you just wanted to get me to watch season 4?
I think I wanted to talk about this on the podcast because it's I think a very important show because of how not only how good it is in my opinion, but in its sort of strides in representation and its inclusivity. And I figured this podcast is not just about movies. We could talk about whatever we want. Um,
We could
so
talk about life.
we could talk about life also. I'm sure that'll come very soon. But yeah, I mean, it's just whatever's fun, and at the time that I finished the series, I felt it really impacted me, so I really wanted to talk about it, um, and get your thoughts, especially.
Okay. That sounds like a lot of great reasons to talk about it. I've always been open to talking about other things on this podcast, although I will say that I do think that our primary focus is movies. Like
Yeah,
that was the impetus for creating this podcast,
right.
because we always talked about movies and we would talk about them till the cows came home. So, um, and and also we should, I mean, but we have plenty of space to talk about movies both through this podcast and also offline.
Yeah.
So I'm still laughing about our exchange about the Eternals, how I was watching it and thinking, God, this isn't as awful as I remember it to
Yeah.
be. And then you're like, yeah, it just had some really bad moments. And once you get past those really bad moments, but actually on the rewatch, I was like, huh, there's actually stuff at stake here. These characters are bad. The premise of this is actually kind of interesting. So
Mm.
well, Sex Education is about a bunch of young people in high school in England. And the main character, Otis Milburn, is he's going to this high school, and he decides his mother is a well-known sex therapist. So he has been raised with all kinds of almost he's almost been over encouraged to sort of think about his sexuality and sexual issues, to the point where it has really contributed to him being an anxious individual. But anyway, at his high school, where he's kind of one of the nerds, not one of the sort of, cool kids, he finds out that he himself is good at giving advice to kids. And so the show is about him and his friends, and all the people in his orbit. There's lots and lots of great characters in the show, and it's about what happens at their high school. It's about the relationship with his mother, but primarily it is about teenagers and all of the questions and that they face, and the issues that they face in terms of exploring their own sexual identity, and their own identity in general, actually. But it is primarily about their sexual identity. So, the show stars Asa Butterfield as Otis. He's kind of a favorite of mine. He's such a lovable dork, and I kind of still love him from Ender's Game.
Yeah, I was
Like,
just about to
really,
say Ender's
yeah,
Game. That was a
yeah.
great one.
I love Ender's Game. I loved him in Ender's Game, even though that's a very grim movie. He just conveys sweaty anxiety better than any actor I know. He's also got this core of sweetness to him, which I just find him adorable. And it also stars Gillian Anderson as his mother, who's playing a British woman. She is a longtime favorite of mine way back from the X-Files. She was one of the main characters of the series, the X-Files, which I was a huge devotee of X-Files. So that's the premise of the show. And so why don't we talk about there's many memorable characters, so we should probably have a separate conversation about our favorite characters. But why don't we start at the high level and talk about what we like, and then also maybe if we had any issues or problems with the show too. So why don't you start?
Yeah, it's so funny because I remember I had scrolled by the show and I just saw the title, just Sex Education. So like, I also when I was recommending the show to a friend, he was like, "Oh, like the show that's all about sex."
It is
Um,
all about sex.
yeah, and it kind of is, but after watching it, it's not the first thing I would say, really. And I know that's it's the whole part of the whole premise of the show. But I think it's a testament to the writing and the story, how it to me it's more about the characters and their lives and what goes on um with their personal lives, because that's really all it's about. Um and the sex education and learning about a lot of uncomfortable things in this uncomfortable period of their lives is sort of just like is like a context or a backdrop to all the actual real shit that's going on.
Yes.
Um, so so it's funny because I felt the same as my friend, but again, I would recommend this to everybody because it's really heartwarming. It's very feel good. I've been saying a lot lately how much I've been starving for just feel good content because everything I watch now is just like so depressing, so raunchy, or so, well, this is raunchy, but so like outside of the box, like just and sort of devastating. And it's supposed to be amazing for how it makes you feel that way. Like, I haven't seen it yet, but like The Bear, I've been watching Succession, like all these like horrible characters doing horrible things, and it's
Yeah.
sort of like the writing is really great, obviously, and they're great shows. It's just like I don't want to feel like that all the time.
I
Um,
feel the same way. It's like not having, I always ask whether or not there's a character to root for in these TV shows that are such like, you know what I mean? That these huge hot new shows like The Bear, like Breaking Bad, like Mad Men. And I think to myself, is there one character among them all that I can root for?
yeah, yeah. It's not a bad thing to just like sweet things happening in media.
Yeah.
Um, because after all, it's an escape a lot of the time. But the thing is that this show is not just like feel good or whatever. It actually it feels it's oftentimes so emotional because you get wrapped up in their stories, the characters' stories, and also in just the way um their relationships unfold.
Yes.
And it's a lot about romance and stuff too, so that obviously uh pings my interest. But I think it's just really well done. And it's about a lot of things that are bigger than just like, the characters too. It's about yeah, again, like I was saying, like representation and acceptance and living in a world where maybe not it's not readily accepted yet, but it could be because it's like almost envisioning a world where we could be living all peacefully together. So
Yes, yeah, that is the utopian idea, I think, at the heart of sex education. So let's talk about the representation piece a little bit more in detail because it actually is truly astonishing, the panoply of sexual interests and issues that are represented by the characters and like all sorts of things related to sex, not even necessarily just good things, So, for example, there's a sexual assault storyline, that plays out across all four seasons. So there's sexual assault, but then in terms of sexual identity, you have there's heteronormative sex, there's queer sexual identity, there's transsexual identity. There's sex when it comes to disabled people, and like exploring the whole notion of between like ableist and disabled. disabled, and a difference in the world, not just through sex. There's other issues that come up that are represented. So, and then there's just so many different ways that they represent sex, and also just characters and identity on screen. I do want to say one thing before we go further into representation, which is that I am of a generation where that amount of sex makes me uncomfortable. So there's so much sex on in the show, especially since the opener is always some type of sexual act that's being performed that's more often than not going hilariously wrong,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that, and so I'm just of the generation where it's shocking. I know that there's like, I think that your generation, and certainly the alpha generation, is going to be much more sex positive, but I was raised in a repressed household, repressed culture, and a repressed age. So when I was on, I think I told you this, I watched season four when I just took this trip to the East Coast. And so I kept on angling my iPad and like looking around me to make sure that there were no
Yeah,
little kids
yeah.
around me. And the funny thing is that the sex isn't even ever meant to be sexy. Like actually, it's never, none of the sex on Sex Education is shot in an erotic or, way. Some of it is meant to express love and romance, just some of it, but most of it is actually, it's actually done for comedic effect and for
Hmm.
educational effect. So there's actually, it's not a particularly, it's not like porn, for example. It's not like, it's not supposed to make you feel aroused or, excited, but at the same time, I am so like bound by my culture and by my age and my background that I kept on just shifting around. And I didn't even, the Alaska Airlines planes have that little ledge where you can put your phone or
Yeah,
your
yeah, yeah.
iPad. There was just no way I was
No
going to put
way.
my
No way.
iPad on there because I
Yeah.
was so freaked out on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I do want to return to representation because there's a slight issue sex education that I noticed with representation, and it has to do with how many storylines they were trying to attend to, like
Right,
how many
right.
storylines that they were trying to attend to. And it felt like sometimes characters disappeared for many episodes, and you're like, what the hell is going on with that
Yeah.
one
Yeah,
storyline?
they were trying to do a little too much, especially with this
Yeah.
last season.
Yes, but the thing I will say is I want to talk about my very, very favorite thing that I love about this show, why I love this show so much. So for me, it was recommended by, I was on a work call actually, and we were just having our usual pop culture conversation at the front before we started the agenda. And we were all talking about the Great British Baking Show. And then somebody said, you really should watch Sex Education. They just represent teenagers so well. That's actually, so what was interesting to me. And when I think back on that comment and that recommendation, a colleague that I really like a lot, and I really trust your opinion a lot. Um, and what I thought about that is that it represents teenagers. It wasn't about representing sex,
Yeah. Yeah.
And as I finished season four, sobbing like a baby, I I thought to myself that is the heart and the truth of that show. They have such affection for teenagers. They have such affection for their characters. So going back to our earlier part of this conversation, when I said, that the show, you want a show that's sweet, and I said I want characters to root for, and it's why I love, the holdovers so much over Poor Things, is because I was rooting for those characters so much in the holdovers. And so in Sex Education, I was rooting for everybody,
Yeah. Yeah.
everybody, and even the people who appeared throughout the show as, quote, bad guys or villains, all of them, every single one of them, even like the awful headmaster from season three, like the one who was so repressive, she even so always got a glimpse of their humanity. You
Hmm.
always got a glimpse of their struggles. So you never thought of them as like this one-dimensional bad guy,
Yeah. Yeah.
And in particular, the redemption arc for Michael, the former headmaster and the father, was extraordinary.
Yeah.
Like it
Yeah.
was extraordinary, the journey that they took him on over the 4 seasons, that he started off as this horrible man, And then over time, you just saw him like work through his issues and fumble at it and be so awkward at it and so pathetic and so awful. And yet, I mean, sometime around season 2 or 3, you were really rooting for him, you know?
Hmm.
And so, um, God, that's all I want in life. I just want, I don't. I think that one of the things about our last several years of politics is that I could so cheerfully imagine like kicking certain people in the balls without like a qualm. Like I would have happily like punched Mitch McConnell in the throat like several times, even though he's this really sad old man. And so I just hated feeling this anger towards humanity. I hated feeling so much anger and disillusionment in humanity.
Yeah.
And sex education makes me feel the way that I want to feel about people.
Yeah.
See, I'm good. I feel I get all teary. I just
No,
want to
me
root for
too.
them.
Me
I
too.
want to root for them.
Every episode I came away feeling much better than where I started.
Yeah.
Because it made me think like because in the course of one episode each character goes through so much, but by the end they all learn at least one thing. Like they learn at least one thing. Like that doesn't mean that they're always happy by the end of the episode, but they at least learn something or it's sort of setting up like where they're going to be learning something. It just makes whatever you're going through at the time feel like normal, and it's everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
So I really appreciated that about every single episode, and especially in season 4 because it was just so much anxious buildup. Like it seemed to be just going downhill the entire season.
Yes.
Um, and and it's so funny because it was going uphill for some characters, and it was the characters that it was going downhill for in the first season, like Michael and like Adam and Eric, and those the characters that had definitely some of the most uh raw sort of journeys in the beginning,
Yes.
that are just purely like you just know exactly why they are the way they are. To have them go on sort of a more uplifting and positive journey in this season with
Yeah.
flipped on the flip side of everybody else, literally, because everybody else was sort of in such an anxious state, and going through so much. So that was really cool too. But yeah, I really loved how you mentioned that every character is humanized and every character is relatable.
Yes. And so I was in terms of the huge affection that this show has for its characters, like this, and it's not even just affection, it's compassion. You know, it's like saying every single one of these people has something going on that we're going to show you that you may be judging their behavior at the outset, but then we're going to
Yeah,
peel away layers and show this.
yeah,
So it's compassion, and it just made me it left me with the feeling like, why are we why are we so awful to, especially to young people? Like, why are we so awful? Like, why are there places that insist that teenagers need to be controlled? You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like, there are states in the United States that still believe, like, I mean, Alabama just ruled that embryos were human beings, you know? And
yeah,
so there is so there's so many efforts, particularly in the United States, to control bodily autonomy. And this show acknowledges, by the way, that bodily autonomy and identity they're not easy freaking questions. You know, they're not questions. Like these people really struggle. I mean, Cal's struggle with dysmorphia this season 4 was really heart-wrenching to watch because they know that they're not they know that they are in the midst of transition, but at the same time they're finding it so disorienting to only be able to take steps towards that transition, you know?
yeah,
And so because they couldn't afford, top surgery, and and they had to go through the National Health Service. And that would never happen, unless they did it privately. So it just made me think about how, these attempts that we see these days to legislate bodily autonomy and questions of sexual identity, like all the attacks against trans people and queer people, and women, in terms of their autonomy and independence. This show is basically asking the question, why? Like, why do we do that? Why instead do we not try to offer guidance and love and support? Why do we not recognize human beings for in all their complexity.
Yeah.
And why do we also not recognize the fact that for teenagers this is not easy? They're just at the beginning of starting to acquire these tools to navigate and to understand themselves. They are all on this very perilous, often fraught journey of self-discovery. So for God's sake, why can't we just help them, and guide them and honor what they know and help them with what they don't know, rather than trying to punish them so much? That's the thing. I feel like this show threw into stark relief how much we punish and judge and castigate young people when they don't even deserve the slightest
Yeah.
iota of that. So, yeah.
Something that was incredibly devastating to learn was one of the episodes that had centered Cal in the middle of their journey was dedicated to a person named Shay Patton Walker.
Hmm.
Um, and I looked up who that was after the show, and it was a person who had um, who was a consultant, a gender consultant on the show. So somebody who made sure, I think, that whatever issues I think related to gender or non-binary queer people was represented accurately and done justice. And it was really devastating because they had taken their own life
Hmm.
during the making of the show.
Hmm.
So that show the episode that had sort of gotten more into Cal's questioning and sort of uh, journey was dedicated to that person, and especially that hit especially hard when towards the end, obviously Cal was going to attempt the same thing.
Right.
And it's just so sad, so sad to think because that was the reality for the person that was offering or was helping the show. And it's so horrible that even working on something as positive and uplifting and probably helpful to a lot of people that age or at least people going through similar things that they didn't feel like they could get the same love and support. So that was just incredibly sad.
Yes.
But
I I can't imagine all the teenagers out there who watch this show. I cannot imagine all the teenagers out there who are allowed to watch this show and who watch this show and see themselves and understand maybe a little bit more about themselves. And so I think that the show deserves the highest praise. It's never going to be an award-winning show. It's never going to be like Succession or The Bear. But it deserves so many accolades for its representation, even though I think that the representation felt rushed. Like I really felt, okay, so let's talk about this.
yeah, definitely.
Oh my gosh. I felt like it was at first trying to do too many things, and so Cal's storyline, for example, really deepened in season 4. But when Cal was first introduced, which I think they were introduced in either season 2 or season 3, um, I felt like they were being really given short shrift. And I think Lily, the sci-fi, the sort of erotic sci-fi character, I think that her issues were also like really skimmed over. And so a lot of times questions were raised and then really, really quickly resolved. And maybe that's actually appropriate. I mean, because in some cases, some of the characters were given very long journeys to think through who they were, their identity, and also to deal with some sort of issue of, that's related to sex. And so Otis, Amy's sexual assault storyline took place over 4 seasons. And then Eric's what it meant for Eric to be queer, and to be out. That was actually, and also
And to
to
be
find
Christian
it
at the same time.
and to be Christian and also to find a community of
Yeah.
people, all of that. So all those were clearly the characters that were given the longest arc. But then other people were, it felt like it was more, I think the word is perfunctory that I want. Like it was just like sort of more, like we're just going to check in on them occasionally, but
Yeah.
we're not really going to give them like, I don't think that there's any way, by the way, to give them as much airtime. It's just that it felt like the show felt like it was trying to do so much and it didn't always succeed. Like it just
Yeah.
didn't always succeed. Jackson is a particularly great example of this. Like, I mean, on one hand, they spent so much time drawing out his anxiety about his heritage, and his testicular, whether or not he had testicular cancer. And so, but at the same time, I did not feel like any of it was fully explored. Like I felt like it was sort of a one note thing and it wasn't done in a really nuanced way. Even though I kind of love his character, and I felt like it had a lot of growth, I don't feel like it was given the same depth. So, did you have any other examples of sort of
I
good or bad?
yeah, it just like you could sort of feel the imbalance
Yeah.
in the especially in this last season. I think they did a great job in the first three balancing everybody's
Hmm.
and especially since, around the three-season mark is usually when I think a lot of arcs are resolved and a lot of like problems are addressed and I mean, Jackson's initial thing was that he was a swimmer, really great athlete, but he didn't want to do that anymore and he had to,
Right.
you know,
Injure himself.
butt heads with his parents, yeah. But he got over that. But then we introduced this new thing that was sort of and that this was also balancing him dealing with his own problems and him with Viv, and his friendship with Viv and Viv having a like abusive, emotionally abusive boyfriend.
Yeah.
So like when you
By
jumped
the way,
between
I felt that Viz's emotionally abusive boyfriend, Bo, I felt that he was like almost a caricature.
yeah,
Do you know what I mean? Like
yeah,
they couldn't work him in sufficiently
mm,
to show they couldn't give him enough space. This was not they tried, but they couldn't give enough space to set up the wonder and the delight of the romance
yeah,
and then to signal the pivot where he descends into something more
yeah,
controlling. It was
yeah.
done
So
very quickly.
they
Yeah.
sort of tried to split the difference.
Yes.
And by that, it just felt like there it was, yeah, like you were saying, it was like a one note thing. And then when they were staying on that one note for too long, or they just kept coming back to it, it just
Right.
felt repetitive. So the one where I really felt it was when uh Joe, the mom, right? The mom's name is Joe, right? Uh
Jean.
Jean, yes. Oh, Joe's her sister. So
Yes.
Joe, her sister, when she went to go on a date with that guy, with the baby and the whole thing that she was bringing the baby to the date. This was before I actually didn't, and this was before we knew that he was the guy that was the father of the
Right.
baby. So, so at that time, it was like, it just felt like such a long scene. And I was like, why are we in this conversation? This is
Right,
just
right,
like,
right,
I
right.
get it. Like there's a baby there and they're on a date, like whatever. It just felt really long. So when they had like a million side characters and a million things, I think that's what contributed to the anxious buildup because like it was one note I was waiting to end, you know, quickly because it was just one thing and I knew what would have I sort of could understand what would have to happen to resolve that. But when they just kept hitting it, it just kept hitting me. It's like they're still feeling this, they're still feeling this, they're still feeling it's like
Right.
you know? And it's like it was so much to handle. So there was a bit of an imbalance for sure. But obviously
Yeah.
like I knew eventually it was going to be satisfying and it was going to work itself out. I do think that it was sort of resolved all in one episode, which is the last episode, which like felt like it could have been a bit more gradual, but I mean, especially with how they made me feel the whole first part. But it still was satisfying, and they still gave me what I was looking for all the characters. So
Yeah,
at
you know what
least
I
there
was
was that.
You know what I was thinking of in a more sympathetic way? You know how we always talk about over exposition in the
Yeah,
movies? And it just struck me as I was watching this show how fucking hard it is to do background. like how it is, how hard it is to establish character motivation, like why they might be acting the way that they are without going into some long, really clunky explanation,
Yeah.
or doing some random ass scene where you suddenly find out, oh, maybe this is why she is the way. So Joe, Jean's sister, was a big example of that. Like
Yeah.
literally that character was so annoying. And obviously I knew that there must be some reason why she's so dysfunctional, you know?
Yeah.
So they do it in one scene, which I don't actually think is sufficient, where they do in one scene where they show that she was inappropriately touched when she was 12 years old, and that they clearly lived in a household where their parenting was very lax, and nobody was really watching out for them, like Jean and Joe's mother. And I was sitting here thinking, "Ugh, this exposition is so clunky." And I was like, well, how else would they have handled it? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, how else would they have handled it without giving her a whole nother storyline and backstory
Yeah.
and like doing another season? So that's what I mean. This is both the benefit of television. I want to talk about this a little bit, actually. This is both the benefit of television and it is the curse of television, which is television, because it has multiple series and multiple episodes, gives you time to establish these journeys and these character arcs in a much more paced way than you can do in a 2 or now 3 hour movie, because most movies are 3 hours, you think. And so you can really find ways to, but the downside of that is that sometimes you just bite off more than you can chew, So a lot of these shows bite off multiple storylines and then they just lose the plot. They just lose the storyline of some of
Yeah.
them. Or if they try to introduce a new character like Cal, in season 2 or season 3, I think it was season 3 actually.
3, yeah.
Yeah, season 3, and then like Joe in season 4, then they have no idea how to handle the exposition part where because you just don't have a stake yet in these characters. And so if I were to ever write a screenplay or a teleplay, Eric, I don't know how I would solve for that. I think I would try to keep it. I think I would feel like I was lost in the forest occasionally. Like,
Yeah.
how did we get here? And who is this character? And I don't know what to do with this character.
Yeah.
And I remember reading this really funny article about Lovecraft Country, which had started on that HBO show, which started with a few really strong episodes that were very well reviewed by the critics. And after like the third or fourth episode, the critics were just like, "What the fuck is happening? Like,
Yeah.
what is going on?" And the show's creator and one of the main writers said they basically admitted in an interview after a time, I just lost track of what was going on because it's so exhausting to write a TV series. It really is exhausting to write a TV series. And these writers' rooms are like intense spaces where people are like pitching ideas and they're like writing, you're writing all these scripts and for characters and it's exhausting, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that it at just some point you just lose the plot, but I think that these are acceptable flaws in sex education.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like it did not
Considering
ruin
all of
Jane.
that, like, it's
Yes.
they did a great job.
Yes, and then I do want to talk a little bit before I go on to before we continue on our profound love for the show and also our favorite characters because I want to talk about that. I do want to talk about one other flaw, which again was not a deal breaker for me. It's when characters are written stupid, like they're written to behave stupidly,
Uh-huh.
And so when Otis was saying that he was the original sex therapist,
Yeah, that was a bit
that was
silly.
so stupid.
It
And so
was.
so even though it was unfair that O attacked him for being a meninist, like for being misogynist, at the same time, I thought that her attack was completely unfounded. But at the same time, I thought that Otis was behaving like such a dumbass,
Yeah.
as if he did not have the most enlightened model of like, therapy and, you know, um, womanhood in front of him, and then he just outright says to this girl, "You don't belong here, you don't belong here. It was my idea." And I was just sitting there going, "Oh my God, writers, how could you what?" Even Otis's awkwardness and his tendency to say the wrong thing at the wrong time, that did not make up for them writing him that stupid at the beginning of the season. Even though I know why they did it in terms of creating that tension, I
Yeah.
just thought it was stupid.
Yeah, I definitely think it was sort of out of left field. Because he should be smarter than that, like a little bit.
Yes.
Like it could be conveyed in a different way, maybe, but and I mean, I guess the same point about it was a very repetitive note how he was like he just kept being throughout the show, he would always have these moments of just being an absolute fucking ass hat. Like to his mom, to like everybody who loves him, which I think is good because that happens. I think characters and people are like that. You could just say the wrong things at the wrong times, and I think that's good. It's just like to have it was doing that a lot, and it was doing that on some unfounded grounds. And then like I hate to mention this because we were talking about how great they are with representation, but the one Asian female character that they introduce is made out to be a villain for like half the season, and they don't give her any humanization or depth really until that debate when she is outed as Ace, which like great development, but like the whole first part of the season I just hated her guts,
Yeah,
and to have that, it's just such a common trope too. It's like with Asian women in particular, and I just why did it have to be that?
I know.
So
I
because
had sensitivity to,
she
I
yeah.
always have sensitivity though. I just want to cop to this and be transparent about this. I always have sensitivity to how Asian characters, East Asian characters, not Southeast Asian, but East Asian characters are handled in shows like this. So I was just outraged at the show Never Have I Ever, which was created by Mindy Kaling.
Mm,
The East Asian character was the worst dressed character in that
yeah.
high school. And I was so
Oh
annoyed
yeah, I
by
remember.
that.
Yeah, yeah.
I was so annoyed. I wanted to say, I just wanted to like write a letter saying, there's just no way
Yeah.
that she would be dressed this badly.
Yeah, and she was the only East Asian female character, I think.
Yes, I
I don't know
think
if there
so.
were any East Asian male characters either. I
I
mean,
don't think
obviously
so.
it's like Britain, but
Yeah.
still, it's just like it bugged me, but such as I mean, I'm glad she was at least developed and she was given a circle, well-rounded character
Yes. The other
arc.
thing that I wasn't sure actually was in the category of writing stupid, like writing characters to behave dumber than they normally would or they should. Do you know what I mean? So the other thing that I wasn't quite sure about is a lot of the problems and conflicts in sex education, like most TV shows, like most, comedies in general, um, would be solved by better communication. Like if you just shared and talked, and so I think I've come down to the side of thinking that this is not making characters behave dumber than they are, but it's actually pointing out the fact that many of us um, are not great at communicating. I think that I sometimes have a strong reaction to this because you and I don't suffer from this problem. Like so we've always been able to talk to each other, and if things are bothering, one of us, we've always been able to share what it is. And I don't think that at least just speaking for myself, I often don't think I have an appreciation for how difficult that is for other people, and so Jean refusing to admit that she had postpartum depression when she's a therapist and she'd be the first person to
Yes.
recommend,
Yeah.
to recommend that somebody get help, or Maeve not being able to talk about why it was so important that her brother show up for her mother's funeral or what she was feeling in terms of grief. She wasn't able to resolve the complexity of her feelings until she was standing up there, until Isaac went out and talked to her. So there's so many, and maybe that is the point, Eric. Like maybe the point is that some things are just so painful and so complicated to think about and process that you have to watch in real time these people like processing it, and
Yeah.
figuring out how to do it. And maybe it's a beautiful thing also. Like I was amazed at how patient Amy and Otis were in waiting for Maeve outside of the hospital. I was amazed because that I wouldn't like hours and hours and hours they were out there putting their lives on hold while they waited for her to emerge from that hospital, just giving her her space and giving her that time before she was ready to leave. And so I think that that is a really valid point to make. It's only when it goes further, like when people don't seem to just be processing, but they just seem to be doing really dumb things that are go against their nature. And
Yeah.
I feel like poor Otis was the victim of that kind of writing more
Yeah.
than
Like
enough.
I felt that there were too many beats of Jean not feeling accustomed to the podcast because she was so stressed and busy. Like there
Right.
were just it just came like I think for Jean specifically since she's older and she should this she should be more sort of developed in that sense, and she's a therapist, that it should have come a little bit quicker. Maeve, I thought made sense because of how much trauma she'd been through and also just her family
Yes.
dynamics. Like her brother's like such a fucking dirtbag. It's crazy. Like, but obviously that came from a certain place. So
Yeah, when
that
Isaac
felt
said
more, yeah,
he's in so much pain,
yeah, yeah,
just yeah, that just really hit home. That
yeah,
really, really hit home. So
um,
overall, I think the show's flaws are minor.
yeah.
How do we feel about it ending after season 4?
Great. I really great. I because I actually didn't see where it would go after season three. I'm glad that I got to see it and it went somewhere that I felt was satisfying. I tend to think like that three seasons is enough. I maybe would have been fine with just the third season. But I think I like where it ended. Um, it's so funny, we've talked this whole time about sex education and we haven't talked about like the main sort of plot of the show, which is the will they won't they with Otis and um
Maeve.
Maeve. Sorry, I forgot her name. Uh, because I think for me, I maybe started to lose interest in their relationship. Like in my view, like at the end of season three, I was like, that was their moment. They had their moment, but it wasn't going to work out. So I just sort of gave up on them making it work. And then that was like sort of deep, but that was way clearer when they were trying to make it work in season four, and it just was going horribly, like so bad. Like, them calling each other. Um, I thought the first episode of season four, when they were calling each other and trying to make it work, was really good. But then when it started getting really sour, it just was like starting to feel like, just stop. Just like, what are you doing? And then when she came back, they tried to make it work again, but it wasn't working. And, they had their own problems to deal with. Um, so as much as I sort of liked where it went, it was just I wasn't as interested as the other sort of it's the other characters or the other journeys that everybody was going on. But that was the core of the first couple seasons and a little bit of the third season was there. That was the characters we could rely on and kind of feel comforted by because they were doing that. Those were the ones we were introduced to first, and they were doing things we were familiar with, like the whole sex therapy business was like just a gimmick that we could like resonate with and just like have fun with. And also we were rooting for them to get together, but didn't really happen. That's same with when what's it Olive came
Ola.
Ola
Ola.
when Ola came, and that
Mhm.
was another beat that was like, oh my God, this is not gonna work, but it's gonna feel so you know excruciating. But yeah, anyways,
I never felt overly invested in Otis and Maeve getting together or not getting together. Like it was mildly satisfying, but not in the way that as if it was the main focus, like if it was a rom-com.
yeah,
To me, the first season of Sex Education introduced me to these characters in this place. And then I was like, oh, I get it. I said, I'm supposed to see where these characters are and where they go. And then the show is either going to make me care about the journey that they're on or they're not. And so for me, it was always about Otis and Maeve separately in terms of their character journey. Like their coming together was only interesting to me insofar as it aided their own journey of self-discovery, like their own journey of like for Otis to not just be able to love somebody, but also to um how can I say this? So much of his he loved Maeve and he wanted to have sex with her, but so much of his love for her was not about sex. Do you know what I mean? Like he thought that she was brilliant. He thought that she was very capable. And then the whole thing about his when her mother died, he just wanted to be there for her. He just wanted to be there for her, period. you know? And even though sex was a part of it, it wasn't the only thing that was going on. For Maeve's journey, and now we're talking about sort of our, and so this is interesting. I'm not sure I can pick a favorite character, but Maeve, I was so invested in her story. I was so, so invested in her story. And um, that final letter that she wrote was just extraordinary, but also the part where Jean manages to overcome like her initial reservations about Maeve, when they're cooking together
Yeah,
and
yeah,
Otis is stuck in the elevator and she said to her, "It just strikes me that you've done an extraordinary job under very difficult circumstances of raising yourself." And it just made me real. And then also when Maeve said to her professor, I have not grown up being told how beautiful or brilliant I am and how I'm going to, succeed. And that really kind of broke my heart, that she managed to succeed despite the fact that she has all the odds were against her to succeed.
yeah,
So yeah, so those characters, so the Otis and Maeve relationship was only meaningful to me insofar as it helped them learn about who they are. And again, it returns to the central premise of the show, which is I just want people to be able to figure out who they are. I really do. So let's talk about characters and, favorite characters. And this is the interesting thing, which is I am having a really hard time picking.
yeah.
So why don't you start? Do you have any that stood out for you in particular?
Well, immediately upon visiting or seeing the show for the first time, Emma Mackey became an instant celebrity crush. So just thought I'd mention that. Um,
Still?
yep. So obviously every scene with her was great. Um, yeah, but in terms of the actual characters, I think I really loved Eric,
Yeah,
coincidentally.
me too. I loved
Um,
Eric.
he was not only was the actor so great at playing
Oh,
him,
so great.
so great. He just was he always had such an interesting journey. I can even I can remember so clearly a lot of the beats in his story. Like the first one was about his dad, or his dad accepting him and his family accepting him for who he was. So, and we moved on from season one with that. Like they accepted him, and then that was part of his life for the rest, despite having other problems going forward, like that, at least we had that. And that was really great. And um, then he had the relationship with Adam, which was like heart-wrenching, um, for both of them. And that
Yes.
was just really, um, just very interesting. And then, I kind of forgot what season three was about with him, but, season four that
That's when
he
he went to
had.
Nigeria.
Right, right, yeah. And that sort of had the same thing. But this he had the most compelling journey for me in this season because um I mean, obviously I'm not a religious person, but he sort of was able to convey so clearly how important it was for him to be able to be accepted by that community because it was what he believed in, and
Hmm.
that's so important. So and I felt for him when Otis was just ignoring him like the whole season, and he was let off for that a bit too easy. Um, because, but I mean, friendships are kind of like that. It's fine. But like, I really liked his journey. On top of that, he was just so fun in every single scene he was in. He totally stole everybody's thunder because of how funny and exuberant he was. So definitely loved Eric the most. Not because he had the same name, but that does add to it.
Yeah, I think Eric was definitely one of my favorite characters. Maeve was one of my favorite characters. I really liked Adam. Um, I've never seen somebody who can make such effective use of such a wooden acting style.
Yeah, yeah.
So there were just so many times when I laughed out loud at just something dumb that he was doing. And then when he went to, when he went to be comforted by the horse. I mean,
Yes.
Adam is so dumb in some ways and so wise in others,
Yeah.
And so yeah, I really but he's traumatized. I mean, he's traumatized from his childhood. He feels like he's always going to mess up and he's always going to be yelled at. and he's never going to be good enough, and nobody's ever going to like him. Like one mistake is enough. He lives in perpetual fear. And that was really brought home. But I just think I think that actor is amazing for doing so much with so little. Like
Yeah.
he does so much. He conveys so much for so little.
Yeah.
And the interactions between Adam and his dad were just kind of they were really
Sweet.
they were really, really sweet and also hard to watch because it's hard to imagine, especially in a family like ours where we're so open with each other and we're also open about how much we love each other. It's really hard to think about all the people who grow up in circumstances not like that,
Mm.
you
Can
know.
I give you a hug? Yeah.
I was, you got weird, Dad.
Like it's so funny that every scene with Adam in this last season was like my center. It was where I felt like, oh, thank God. Like we're just gonna get something sweet and nice. Like
Yeah,
especially with, the girl who worked at the farm and the horse and him learning how to work with horses. Um and obviously him ending his relationship with his dad. I think like all of those things, like I felt relieved when we were visiting his character again because and again, flip side, like because he was always the worst in the first season. He was the offensive bully, character. So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So this is not a character, but this is an interesting theme that I wanted to ask you about, which is, obviously there's the whole notion of there's this whole backlash against being woke, which is just some conservative nonsense about like what it means to be woke. And so the Cavendish College that they all ended up at after Moreland High School,
Yeah.
Moreland Academy closed down. Cavendish was like a parody of wokeness.
Yes,
You know
yes.
what I mean?
I
It was like
I so appreciated that.
yeah, it was such a
So funny.
parody of wokeness, right? And at first it was I think that this was intentional, but it was like the first experiences of being in Cavendish in my mind would have made me, if I had been in that situation, I would have been going crazy. Like I
Yeah,
would have been
yeah.
going crazy. I would have been like, this is the most annoying fucking place I've ever been to.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I'm so, so, so annoyed. It reminded me of my worst moments at Brown, where like I remember being in this speech and rhetoric class one time. And we were talking about how language shifts and changes to reflect, updated norms and ideas in society. And then I said, I think about this all the time because I said my parents still call themselves Oriental, even though that's been, completely outlawed. And this white chick turns to me, this white woman turns to me, girl, and she turns to me and she goes, I hope you've explained to your parents how wrong it is that they're saying that. And I literally had this moment of being taken aback, and I wanted to say to her, who the fuck are you? Fuck are you to say what we know, like what my parents should call themselves? Do you know what I
Mm,
mean? And so that feeling of like prickly defensiveness, like and how over the top ridiculous it can get, to be like how progressivism, like anything can be pushed too far and it can be too extreme. I was feeling that reaction kind of viscerally at
absolutely.
Cavendish, like so much. And then what was interesting to me is that I think that the arc of the show and the setting, I think that they pulled back the curtain on a place like Cavendish and showed it that it had flaws. Like it's not a perfect place. So the whole thing about the elevator being perpetually broken.
Yeah.
But I think the funniest moment that really brought home that Cavendish was not. Well, there was the moment when Abby, like when it was pointed out to Abby that maybe her positivity was toxic,
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was number one. And then was the outcome of the election when the principal said, when, they just kept on passing the baton, and the principal said, well, that was a fucking waste of time.
Yeah.
When he said that, I was just like dying of laughter. But
Yeah.
I am glad that they started off really going hard at the whole Cavendish idea. And then midway I was just like, oh shoot, they're actually gonna make it seem a little bit more real and a little bit more meaningful, you
Right.
know?
Yeah, and it
So
was on the flip side of their original school, which was so like conservative, like
impressive. Yes.
oppressive, like just like the exact opposite. Because especially when it came to anything related to sex or sexual orientation or whatnot.
Yes.
So and
Yeah.
I also missed this is just so random, but I missed those teachers that were
Yes,
at the older school, and it was so nice that they came back. And it was so it was like so beautiful that that one teacher was playing the piano at the
yes,
funeral.
yes.
Um, sorry, random, but like, that
It was
I
beautiful.
agree with all that, and I'm glad that they showed. I'm glad that that school was like the environment for this, or the setting for the season, and I think it worked out.
In the first couple episodes when I was looking at the school and taking in the school, what I all I could think of was Lily's show, with all the musical production with all
Yeah, yeah,
all the vaginas and the penises and everything like really out there and like
mm,
all the wild costumes and props. And I was thinking that expression in general, like self-expression or creative expression is sometimes it is done spontaneously and freely, but sometimes it is done in reaction to something. It is done in
yeah,
reaction to boundaries or restrictions. And so I was thinking about the contrast between what happens to creative expression when you do it. So so Lily made that show more and more outlandish because she felt like she wasn't in the environment that welcomed it, so they had to just keep on pushing those boundaries. Whereas in Cavendish, like everybody was allowed to express themselves freely, but then it just sort of reveals how the teenagers there are exactly the same. Do you know what I mean? Like they have the
yeah.
same issues.
True.
They were bringing the same types of questions to Otis and to O, and so they were all bringing the same types of questions and issues and concerns. And so when you think about it, again, it gets back to this thing. Self-expression is not an easy thing. Self-understanding is not an easy thing. And the the interesting thing about sex education was that even though the main focus was on teenagers and how fraught it is for them during that period in particular, you still had people going through self-discovery, like Jean and Michael. You had older characters. So it's basically saying that to be human, you have to constantly ask yourself, where are you at and who you are? And that's going to shift over time and with circumstances. And so well, that feels particularly relevant to me. I just had a birthday. I'm 56 years old. So, like I'm always thinking like, what does my next phase really look like? Because it's not going to stay the same. You guys get older. My jobs change, my work changes, my life changes. And so it's really good to be reminded that self-discovery is meant to be a lifelong thing and that everybody
Right.
struggles at all ages, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah,
Anyway.
especially when I finished this season, uh it was just at such a perfect time because of how much anxiety I've been feeling about the future, about school, about my life and what I want and everything. Like it just seemed to address so perfectly all of those things in one show. Um, so and it just there were so many lines that just hit like exactly, or if I had just experienced something or felt um or something had happened that day, like it's almost like it was like, hey, you, that thing that happened too, like maybe just
Yes.
listen to this for a second. So super, it was rejuvenating, in a very positive way.
Yeah, I felt rejuvenated too. I was both welcoming all the contact that I had on my East Coast trip of seeing Annie and old friends, and then spending all that time with my mom, and then seeing my dad. I was going through just a really complicated roller coaster of emotions. And so watching that show reminded me that that's life, that you
Yeah.
just have to what was the saying? Feel your feelings. You just have to feel your feelings and get through it. And I say this to you and Annie all the time, Sometimes there's just way too many feelings, and that's another thing that the show is really good at reminding you of that sometimes feelings are just so overwhelming. They feel like they're like flattening you to the ground, or it feels like you're paralyzed and you can't move forward, and that you have to figure out some way to get out of this enormous weight of feelings, And so being able to just cry and laugh at shows like that actually is a really good way to get out feelings.
Hmm.
Although I'm sure the couple on the flight home I mean, I watched the funeral episode and then I was using like every tissue and napkin and the sleeve of my shirt to like wipe my eyes because I was crying so much. So I think at some point they were just going to lean over and be like, "Are you okay?"
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
it was really emotional.
yeah.
Anyway, all right. Well, that wraps up, sex education and our conversation. I think that I'm glad that you prompted me to watch it. We were always sort of out of time alignment in terms of when we were watching it, I know. So there were times that I had watched the seasons and you had not watched it, but we arrived at the same destination, and it's really great that we had this moment to sort of talk about how we felt about it, because it's a great show. It is a really, really great show, and it deserves to be watched, although perhaps not on an airplane with lots of little kids around. So
Oh,
that's my only caveat. That's my
yeah,
only
I completely
caveat.
agree.
Okay.
And in the future, I think we could definitely do a lot more TV shows. Definitely sticking to movies, obviously. I think right on the horizon is Dune 2 because that's coming out this next week. So we'll probably do that. But I see in the future, since we watched the first season of Blue Eye Samurai, we'll probably we could when that comes back, we could do an episode on that. So yeah, just more things to come, hopefully. So thanks
All
for
right.
watching
Well,
it.
let's wrap. Yeah. Well, anyway, and also, I had told Eric that a couple people, random people, have mentioned to me that they watch this podcast quite regularly. So I do want to end this episode by saying thank you so much to everybody for who watches or listens. This is obviously something that Eric and I love doing, but it never ceases to surprise me that people like to listen,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
anyone, like that there's one person who will listen into our conversations.
yeah.
So thank you. And I will also do my usual sign off, which is Eric, I love you very much.
I love you too. And also thank you everybody for putting up with low production quality. Uh
Yes.
I think, you were kind of choppy in some bits, so sorry there. But you know what? We make it work. I think it's good enough. I like listening back to it regardless, so that's just me.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah. See,
thank
you
you
froze a
guys.
lot for me too. But in addition, our usual terrible bandwidth was even worse the last week. So Dad and I have been in the situation of just having, like, we've been on Zoom calls for work, or I was doing a Zoom exercise class the other day, and just it just cuts out our internet. So it might have something to do with
Yes.
the storms. It might have something to do with that national 18. Anyway, I don't. I think that that's a boring way
Yeah.
to end. So you'll cut this out.
Sorry. Yeah, my bad. But
All right.
yeah, thank you. I love you and next time we'll do something fun.